Call them change makers.
Call them rule breakers.
We call them redefiners. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Redefiners. I'm Hoda, a leadership advisor at Russell Reynolds Associates, and I'm joined once again by my very captivating and fantastic colleague and co-host, Simon Kingston.
Hi, co-hostly Hoda. Very good to be with you.
Before we get started, Simon, just a quick reminder to our listeners that you can find all episodes of Redefiners and the Leadership Lounge on YouTube. If you're currently watching on YouTube and you haven't yet subscribed to the show, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button below so you don't miss an episode. And for our audio listeners, don't forget to rate Redefiners wherever you get your podcasts. And please share your feedback on each episode as well as guest suggestions. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. Simon, as we start to think about this episode, do you have any pets, or did you grow up with pets when you were younger?
I grew up with a great many pets. I think the maximum score was 6 cats and 3 dogs at one point.
Oh my!
Named after board games by my insane parents who had 4 children. And we have one dog now in my family who was bought to be a companion in his old age to a lovely purebred Parson Jack Russell that we had, who was at that point, this is 3 or 4 years ago, getting a little bit old. And so in West Cork, where I come from, we bought what was allegedly a fox terrier, but transpires to have been a cross between a Jack Russell and a corgi. And Lisa probably knows this, but the term of art for one of those is a Kojak. And older listeners will get the reference. And he is a total hooligan. He now lives with us for most of the year.
And what is his name?
His name is Tiberius, obviously.
Okay, well, with a name like that, it kind of says it all.
Small dogs with emperor-like tendencies. So he's known as Tibby, but he's really a farm dog and not well suited to London life, but he spends most of his life here terrorizing passers-by. So he's a thug. He's a terrible person.
I'm not a dog owner, but I am a terrific dog auntie to a number of dear friends. And what I have learned is that people who have pets of any sort truly love them and treat them as their own family members. And pet parents know that their fur babies are not only adorable and will do anything for them, they are so loyal and so lovable. In fact, according to Bloomberg Intelligence, the global pet industry is expected to grow from $320 billion today to almost $500 billion by 2030. Pet parents tend to treat their pets like they would with their own children, often sparing absolutely no expense to make sure their beloved pets are taken very well care of. And I can tell you, Simon, my friends spare absolutely no expense, from the grooming to the colorful little accessories. It's really adorable.
It's true. And it's not just driven by my children alone. There are an extraordinary range of things. And I think we're going to talk a bit about this. The breadth of the services and the products that we procure for our pets has grown. And that, of course, includes the food, it includes the accessories, it includes those toys you've mentioned, but also thinking about their health and thinking about preventative care in a much more systematic, much more serious way than I think was the case not so long ago. It's an important part of the pet-owning household budget.
Well, today's guest is leading the charge on redefining the pet care industry to create a truly holistic pet care experience. This CEO will shed some light, pun intended, on the industry and share how she's leading her company in a very growing and expansive market. Simon, please tell our listeners who our guest is today.
Well, she has quite a tale to tell. Lyssa McGowan, who is Chief Executive Officer of Pets at Home. That's the UK's leading pet care business. We're going to hear a lot about that. But before joining Pets at Home in 2022, Lyssa had an extremely successful career in leadership roles at Sky, where she was Chief Consumer Officer. And she led the whole of the consumer business there, serving more than 10 million customers and running a business with revenues of around about $10 billion. And before that, she had roles at both McKinsey and at Telewest. And alongside it, she was formerly a non-executive director at Morrison's. So she's brings a breadth of executive and non-executive experience to this. And in addition to all of that, she is, I believe, the proud owner of 2 Labradors, Freddie and Barney. And incidentally, but we might as well have it for the record, is mother to 3 human children as well.
Lyssa, welcome to Redefiners.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
So, Lyssa, before we jump in, I read that 85% of your team are pet owners. I'm a little curious. What does bring your dog to work day look like at your company?
That's a great question. Bring your dog to work day is every day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we have pet kitchens. We have an agility course behind the support office. We have a lot of expensive cable trays to stop the pets chewing cables under the desks. No, it's really lovely. There's pets always in the office. The odd rabbit comes in. So yeah, really, really, really lovely atmosphere. And I think it's part of the culture of the business that we have pets everywhere. Our purpose is to create a better world for pets and the people who love them. And that starts right at home.
How amazing.
I have to say, though, I've got a very similar dynamic in my two Labradors as Simon does, in that my elder one is this lovely, elderly kind of support dog. He's so calm, so sweet, so lovely. And so we bred from him, hoping that his temperament would come out in the puppies. And we got Barney, who is an absolute hooligan. And so I can't take him to the office because he's so naughty. And I do sometimes take him on photo shoots when I'm in the press and things. And he just always gets his private parts out and refuses to comply. So he's just so naughty. But we love him. He's absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, he's not office trained, shall we say.
Well, yeah, he sounds like he's got a lot in common in terms of character and genital tendencies with Tibby.
Indeed.
But it does make you slightly doubt the science behind selective breeding. But that is not the purpose of this podcast. Lyssa, as we mentioned, you became CEO at Pets at Home in 2022, but prior to that, you'd had this very interesting career at Telewest and at Sky UK. So can you talk a little bit about the journey to your current leadership role and what in the end it was that caused you to make that move into the whole pet care area?
It's always a bit weird on how far back do you go. So I'll go back to kind of my uni degree, I think, which was in geography. And I really loved that because it was this balance of the human, the physical, the arts, the science, data and creativity. And that kind of, I think, set me up really well for a career in business because it's those hard and soft skills that you really have to bring together. And actually, ultimately, as a CEO, really important to get that blend. So I knew I wanted to do business. And so I joined McKinsey. And they had this program at the time where you did a couple years with McKinsey and then a couple of years in industry and then go off to business school and then back to McKinsey. So I followed that path with one slight deviation, which is I had my first daughter when I was in the middle of my MBA at Harvard Business School, which was a real introduction to work-life balance. And nothing has ever felt quite as hard since because they have rules at Harvard Business School, like they did in those days 20 years ago, about missing class. So you're allowed one day off for your own marriage, one day off for the death of in your nuclear family, or one day off for the birth of your own child. So when I went in, I said I was pregnant. They said, "Oh, don't worry. Those are meant for the men. We have had women here who've taken 2, 3, 4, even a whole week off."
Oh, like, wow. How what? Generous.
Yeah, no. So I negotiated half a semester. So anyway, so that was interesting. So then I went back to McKinsey as a mum. In my 20s. And I got to kind of my early 30s and I had a bit of I know this podcast is about redefiner moments. I had a bit of a redefiner moment as I got just approaching 30, where I just realized that in consulting, I was only really bringing half of myself to work. It was only really half of my skill set. I loved actually the problem solving. I love working in small teams on big strategic problems, but I wanted to do as well as think. I didn't want to be the person whispering in the ear of the person making the decision and then never being around for it to happen. So I decided that I wanted to go into industry, into a role where I could grow businesses and lead big teams of people and actually kind of get things done and kind of see the impact of the decisions. So that's why I joined Sky. And it turned out to be the most brilliant decision. I spent 12 years there, absolutely loved it. It's such a unique culture at Sky. It's a really believe in better as the tagline, and that's how it feels. Both the belief, the kind of the confidence, the ambition, but also the fact that there's this discomfort with the status quo, like a restlessness. And so we kept innovating. We always felt like the challenger, never the incumbent. It was a really high performance organization. And I was able there to really grow my career, first of all, leading the broadband business. Then we started a mobile business, which was like an amazing startup, but with all the resources of a big incumbent. We were able to do some really innovative things there. And all of this time, because it wasn't the core business of Sky, everyone was really focused on TV. I got to do loads of really interesting and cool things as I was sort of growing my exec career. So I've always been attracted to roles maybe where you're doing something a bit innovative and different, and then eventually came on to run the whole consumer business. So that was a great time, and it was actually a real wrench to leave, I have to say, because it's such a fun, dynamic place, and I'd been on this journey from taking it from an analog TV provider to kind of a media and telco behemoth. But ultimately, I just felt really ready to be a CEO. It was just the time.
And when it came, I mean, how logical or different did that sort of transition to the CEO role feel? Because you've been running a big business, as you say. I mean,
I often talk about the CEO role as it's not kind of quantitatively different. I thought it would be 30% harder than a divisional, owner or executive. And it's not any percent harder. It's just a completely different role. And like with any transition, what gets you to be successful in your old role is almost the thing that will hold you back in your new role. People say it's lonely. I don't find it lonely because there's actually lots of people that you can talk to. I've got lots of mentors, lots of people will give you soundings and advice. But in the end, the buck stops you. You have to make the call. When something is difficult and you're an executive, your job really is to figure out the plan. Ideally, keep the CEO away so you can figure it out and get on with it. But if you have to involve the CEO, convince the CEO of kind of what's the right next step. But when you're the CEO, you have to convince yourself. And it turns out I'm a much harder sell than any of my bosses. And quite often you're choosing between, not great options and you're only 50% sure that one of them might be the best. And then you have to kind of perform this alchemy where you pick one and then convince the organization that it's, absolutely logical and clear and we should all follow it. And performing that alchemy is repeated. And so I think it's just a very different role. An exec leadership team is not the same as a divisional team. You've got much bigger people with much more gravitas, but also, so you can't manage them in quite the same way. And you've not really got a boss, but you've got a board and you've got shareholders. So it's more diffuse, but that makes it somewhat more complex. So I think just the role itself is so different, and I'm not sure anything can prepare you for it, but almost going into it knowing it is so different is quite helpful, and that you have to leave a lot of what made you successful behind. Because when things got tough before, I would go faster, dive in harder, kind of, get into the organization, make things happen. And you can't do that as a CEO. You have to stand back and create space. So very different.
Lyssa, as you were talking about your time at Harvard, it made me smile because I think a lot of our listeners who are our female listeners would sort of resonate with a lot of what you said. And this episode is actually going to come out around International Women's Day. And you've been very generous in lending your time to Russell Reynolds' Artemis program as a contributor, as a mentor. You talked about some of the mentors that you have. For our listeners who don't know about Artemis, it's our unique one-year experiential accelerator program for women executives who are considered 1 to 5 years away from becoming a credible CEO contender. But Lyssa, will you tell us a little bit about your experience with Artemis and what made you choose making time for this program?
I spent a lot of time coaching and mentoring women throughout my career. I think the experience of women who want to become senior executives and the barriers that they face are generally quite different than what I've experienced when I've been coaching men. And so I feel incredibly privileged to live in a geography and a time in history where my opportunity to be a CEO is even possible. Like, it's probably only in the last 30 years and only in like 10% of the globe where this is even an option. So I just feel that, I don't carry that weight heavily. I just feel incredibly privileged. And so I want to pay that forward, and I want to make sure that, I help women frame their experiences and their capabilities in the way that helps them succeed. So it's quite core to me.
And what do you think are some of the key barriers holding back women from becoming CEOs?
So when women come to me for coaching in that kind of area of their career, or actually any area of their career, any point in their career, it's such a different experience than when men come. And I think it starts really early in childhood, where when boys fall down, they're told, get up and try again, right? Get up and try again, keep going. And they frame success as like 51-49. Whereas little girls are told, don't fall down, you'll get dirty. So women frame success as 100 out of 100, right? And if they get to 99 out of 100, they think they failed. All the women that come to me say, my issue is confidence, right? I don't have confidence. And I'm like, well, you have to have confidence as a CEO. It's like saying, I want to be a CEO, but I can't do analytics or public speaking, or these are just
table stakes
for the job. So I help build confidence. And I think, explaining that the frame of reference is wrong. You can't be heading for 100% and beating yourself up because you got 99, right? You need to reframe that as you're 51-49. And that is so powerful because I say to women, every woman compares themselves against what their perfect self would have done. I call her perfect Lyssa.
And doesn't really exist either. I mean, this notion of perfection, it doesn't exist.
Impossible.
It's impossible.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
And, you can't compare yourself to perfection. You have to compare yourself to, am I the best person in this place right now to do this job? Yeah, in that case, I'll get on and do it. So for a lot of women, it's about frame of reference of what success is that is actually holding them back. There's that thing that everyone says, oh, well, if women can do, 9 out of 10 things on a job, they might put themselves forward. Whereas men say, oh, 6 out of 10, I'll do it. But it's all of that. It's the frame of reference. And so I try and coach people to look around at everyone around you and say, am I doing as well as, if not a little bit better than that? Okay, I'm good. Rather than this idea of perfection that no one likes that cow.
And are there maybe 1 or 2 gems that you help them with the confidence piece? Because it's such an important topic, and a lot of people are talking about this right now.
Yeah.
But do you have 1 or 2 key takeaways that you sort of point them to?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So I hate it when people say I've got imposter syndrome, because it sounds like it's a syndrome that's like, okay.
It's like a disease.
Exactly. You can't have imposter syndrome and be a CEO, because then you're thinking about yourself all the time. You're thinking about, what's everyone thinking about me? How am I showing up? How am I feeling? And as a senior leader, you can't be thinking about that. You've got to be thinking about, how's this person what's this person taking from me? How am I leading this person? How am I showing up for this team, for this organization? So one thing is like, stop focusing on yourself, stop worrying about your confidence, think about other people and what you owe to them in a leadership position. And then you your frame of reference again is changed. The other thing, of course, is just fake it. Like, you just fake it till you make it. I was once on this training course where there was this really geeky guy, really like shy and unconfident. And we were given it was really early in my career. I was like 21. They gave us all a status card and said, act this status, because they were sending junior consultants in to talk to CEOs. They wanted us to understand the kind of status thing. Anyways, this guy who's like really shy and geeky gets given the card 10. And immediately his shoulders go back and he starts being this CEO character. I'm like, dude, you just need to do that your whole life.
Be that person. Yeah.
Be that guy. And I think there's if you fake it for long enough, the people respond to you in the way that you're appearing. And therefore that builds your confidence. And eventually you forget you're faking it and it just becomes normal.
And the two align in some magic timeline.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a hard one because so many people feel it, but top tips.
Thank you. Those are great.
Lyssa, thinking of the context in which you arrived as CEO at Pets at Home, like lots of retail businesses, there'd been a boom during the pandemic. You arrived after it, but no doubt at this point where in the UK, like everywhere else, there'd been a boom, and then there was a cost of living crisis. Just as we get through the pandemic, suddenly there's a contraction in people's sense of what their incomes really were and what their discretionary spend was going to look like. How was that for you as a first-time CEO coming into a business that's been through that? How did that expansion and then potential contraction play out at Pets at Home?
Yeah, it's tricky because Pets at Home is a hugely successful business, and the number one pet care retailer, the number 2 biggest vets in the UK. It was number 3 when I started. It's number 2 now. We've got one spot in grooming, accessories, nutrition. Like, it's a huge business, hugely successful, way bigger than the next kind of 2 or 3 bricks and mortar competitors combined. And a very proud business, proud of its heritage. And it managed the pandemic brilliantly. So it was open throughout the whole pandemic. And the culture is very strong at Pets at Home, incredibly pet centric. This purpose of creating a better world for pets, the people who love them, runs right through the company. We've got 16,000 expert colleagues, whether they be veterinary surgeons or nutrition experts or experienced groomers or right the gamut, but they get up and come to work every day to create a better world for pets, the people who love them. So you've got this incredibly purpose-driven organization that was open all through COVID, and then this massive pet boom. So the dogs and cats were just walking in the door. We couldn't, the biggest stress, but how do we get stock on the shelves fast enough to service it? And it was, this huge thing. And actually, when I came, everyone was really tired, especially the vets, because we were one of the few vets that stayed open. They'd been under a lot of pressure. They'd given their all. I'm rightly proud of how we'd performed. But then you had this cloud on the horizon that was coming, and the strategy that we needed to deploy going forward was much more about the skill set that I brought around technology, consumer insight, data, digital, building platforms, but without breaking the brilliant stuff that was going on in vets and retail. So it was very much a jigsaw piece to kind of bring in those new skills, sort of change the culture a bit so that we were a bit more, we had a very high support culture, but not a lot of challenge, because it had been, very much about how do we service pets. The new world, the new level of competition, the headwinds that were coming required more challenge in the culture to get to a high performance culture, but without breaking all those things that were really special and that lovely pride in how well we'd managed the pandemic. So I thought of it really as a tightrope, and it was a tightrope on many dimensions. Keep the support, but add the challenge. Keep all the brilliant retail and veterinary skills, but add the capacity and capability around technology and digital and data. So it was a real balance. Sort of keep the pride in what had been achieved, but be honest about the challenge that faced in the future. And I think in some ways that's harder than a burning platform, because a burning platform is just clear, right? Stop doing all of that. We've got to do this. And in crises like COVID, things become boiled down to their essence. And I think when you're in a growth, great culture, lovely culture, but you've got to be different, that balancing act is tougher.
And what for you were the kind of signs that you were getting close to overbalancing in one direction or another? What did you develop as your kind of way of gauging that you were still on the tightrope?
I would have every sort of quarter, I'd have hour-long calls with my top 40 people just to kind of check in. And I think because, a lot of times CEOs talk a lot to their exec team, but I think going a level down and even a level below that and just building those relationships with long-serving, long-standing people and just getting that feedback. I also spent a lot of time out in stores and vets, and that was for 2 reasons. One is to gauge what's going on at the front line, but the other is to be visibly out there and be seen to be there at the front line, because you want, in a business that's rightly proud and very connected to pets, you want to be out there feeling that. So I don't think there's any substitute in a multi-site operational business for spending a lot of time out the front line. So yeah, I think those things. And then I made sure that in my team, I had those culture carriers. In fact, I promoted one of them to be our chief people and legal officer. She's fabulous, but she was a real culture carrier for the business and a kind of lightning rod, and very much kind of, could just sense, because it was such a different culture to Sky, and such a different culture to McKinsey, where I'd done the big stints in my career. I needed that help and just figuring out what was going on, bubbling under the surface.
And there must have been, in that post-pandemic period, it was a sort of perennial headline, the number of pets that had been bought during the pandemic who were being neglected or abandoned. Your people must have been encountering some of that and must in a way have been the front line for some of that.
We are the biggest funder grant maker to rescue charities across the UK. We support over 800 rescues and have donated £50 million over the last decade to supporting them. And we also, in the cost of living crisis, launched a scheme to feed pets, because human food banks are reporting that people were taking food and sharing it with their pets because they didn't want their pets to go hungry. So we stepped in and did it with the Blue Cross, did a food bank. So we're pretty close to those issues. And I think what actually happened is during the pandemic, all the shelters emptied as all the pets got adopted. And then afterwards, there was an increase, but actually only in proportion to the pet population. That, the big stories about all these abandonments, they're not really borne out in the numbers. They make a good newspaper headline, but most people, as you would know, Simon, would not give up their pet unless they absolutely had to. And some of that might be cost of living, and some of that might be, they took on a pet while they were working from home and they really don't have the capacity to care for them. But equally, they may have become too elderly to care for them. I mean, these are things that have been going on, for years and years, but people are really reluctant, rightly so, to give up their companion. So it's not that there was like this wave of adoption. So we did respond. We have an adoptions club, so you can get all the benefits of our puppy and kitten club. But yeah, I think the work I'm really proud of the work we're doing with the Blue Cross to keep to keep dogs and cats in the homes with their owners, rather than having to give them up for adoption.
There were a couple of things Tibby did last week that made me question that commitment, but yes.
Yeah, I know. When Barney ate my brand new shoes, I was a bit like, I don't know, but yeah.
Lyssa, when you were describing the shift of where the business or the core business, what it was when you stepped in versus where you're migrating it now, and sort of expanding on some of these other facets of, the grooming, the clinics, the distribution centers, et cetera. Tell us, how have you been able to make that transformation from a leadership standpoint, and what is your vision going forward?
I think of it as a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, in that the business skills and capabilities when I turned up were amazing, right? So, really well invested national footprint of pet care centres, which had vets and grooming and retail, really strong culture, great category authority, a joint venture vets model, which is really unique and very powerful. So the sort of core veterinary and retail skills were there, and the job there is learn them. So I asked a lot of questions, spent a lot of time like working in vets, in the distribution center, cleaning out fish, really understanding from the bottom up how that stuff worked and preserving that. But then wrapping around that, the kind of digital technology, marketing, customer insight skills that the business needed to go forward, and bringing in people to do that. So, the jigsaw puzzle, the two pieces needed to come together. And so the vision that we set for the business was to become the world's best pet care platform. And that is a omnichannel platform. So you can walk into one of our pet care centers, and that's really powerful, and face-to-face treatment, medical, buying big 15-kilogram bags of dog food. These are things, getting your dog groomed. They're all things you're going to always want to do face to face. But wrapping around that, a digital experience, which is not just e-commerce, but advisory, telemedicine, e-pharmacy, virtual, hybrid. So all of that omni-channel. And we've got huge economies of scale there in terms of our distribution, in terms of how far we can amortize a digital platform, because the digital platform doesn't really care if I'm doing a post-surgical consult with a vet or a nutrition advisory with a colleague in store. It's a functionality. So there's real economies of scale in that omni-channel experience and being there where the customer wants to be. And then in terms of the integration, so having vets, grooming, retail, all of this, because there's a spectrum of cardiac surgery on a hamster all the way through to, well, probably not on a hamster actually, but at least on a cat, all the way through to buying a tennis ball for your dog, and all of the supplements and wellness and food and nutrition, everything in between. So to the extent we can integrate that and make that a super easy experience and get customers to spend more of their share of their pet wallet with pets at home, that's a really important part of the platform. So omnichannel integrated. And then the third leg is consumer centric. So we have an enormous amount of data. We've got 10 years of data on half the nation's pets, more than half the nation's pets. We know what your dog's vaccine record is and what it ate for breakfast. So if we can leverage that into really great advice, support, and triggers to get you more engaged in the platform and do everything that you can. So, if we know your cat or your dog came in for a gastric issue in the vet, we should be marketing, the particular sensitive stomach food to you and probably giving you a discount because you're a club member. And so it all comes together into this platform. And that's what we're trying to build. But it has to wrap around a core business that's really working, and then you bring in the rest of it to make it hum. So again, it's slightly that tightrope of how do you stretch resource without just kind of adding a load of costs to build the future, but make sure that the core business is still humming.
And as that's underway, because it's an extraordinarily compelling proposition, the breadth of the offering, and clearly differentiates you from people who are merely engaged in the retail side of it. But what was the conversation with your customers like along the way? I mean, and how much did that shape the way the integration and the consumer-centric bits of that played out?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I mean, I've spent my life building consumer-centric, technology-enabled businesses, but consumers can tell you some things. I mean, I can't remember the old Ogilvy quote, but they can tell you what they like and what they don't like. They sort of can tell you what they would like if you give them some really clear options, but they can't really imagine a future that you're imagining and tell you they want that. So it's, I think it's really important you get consumer insight and deep consumer understanding of where consumers are. But I don't think they can tell you what they don't know. And if you're trying to build something that no one else has done before, you have to find proxies for what you think consumers want and a little bit of gut feel and understand. So, when I built the mobile business at Sky, we came up with this concept of a piggy bank. So the issue at the time and still now is, you pay for these big data packs because you're terrified of running out and having to pay a load of extra money for extra data. But then it's really annoying because you're overpaying, but you need that buffer. So we have this concept called roll. So any data you didn't use rolled into a piggy bank at the end of the month, and anyone in your family could draw down from that piggy bank. Now, that insight didn't really come directly from consumers going, what would you like to do with your data?
Yeah.
But it came from looking at adjacent industries like with rolling kind of charging. It looked at understanding consumer behavioral economics. It was from my experience of my daughter spending £400 with Vodafone because she was watching Dance Mums in her bedroom and the Wi-Fi was too slow. So, all of these things, you kind of, you get insight from consumers, but you have to put it together, understanding your P&L, your technology capability, your economics, and project forward what you think the experience is.
And wrapped up in that purpose is a commitment to sustainability externally. And you've got some pretty punchy targets. How did you choose them? How did you decide how that component of purpose was going to be realized?
When I turned up, we had actually a huge number, as you would expect in a company that's sort of got purpose, right? It's just a lot, like tens and tens of sustainability type kind of objectives. And so we cut it. I kind of worked with the board and with the business to cut it into 3 clear pillars. So people, pets, and planet. And I think if you want a sustainable business, for us, we need to work across all 3 of those. So it's not just about environmental sustainability. And so on the people pillar, it's very much a commitment to being the best promoter and developer of pet care talent. So we invest in graduate programs for vets. We invest in training and development, social mobility, bringing people through, working with charities, because quite often people that have found other jobs challenging for various reasons find their home in pet care because they just love animals. And we find people just flourish in pets at home that maybe haven't been so happy elsewhere. And we've got really low turnover and really high tenure. And that's part of it. So the people pillar is really important. We also invest in workshops for long-standing relationship with the Scouts. We do the half term, so kids can come in and learn about handle some guinea pigs and learn about taking care of animals, and that's part of our developing the pet care owners of the future. Then we have our pets pillar, and that's about welfare standards, the work I talked about, the foundation, the fundraising, the grant making, and just that is in everything we do every day, making sure that we take care of pets. That's what most people in my business get up to do, hands-on, every single day. And we also work with government and with a bit lobbying to sort of make sure that pets and advocate for them as a big voice in the industry. So that's the pets pillar. And then the planet pillar is pretty broad, actually, again. So in the vets, we're working with low flow anesthesia, because actually anesthetic gas is quite a big problem for the atmosphere. We've got a partnership with a company called Meatly, which is making cultivated food in labs, so that, you know, one day hopefully we don't have to slaughter animals to feed pets. And importantly, we've got a commitment, as you say, to carbon net zero. The biggest thing we can do there is get dogs and cats from eating wet food to dry food, because dry food is actually about an order of magnitudes better in terms of environmental sustainability. So that's a real direction of travel for us as well.
And on that, how do you see your role in sort of educating and changing your customers' behavior? I mean, because there's a fine line between informing and directing, isn't there?
Yeah, well, we have these debates at the board all the time, actually, which is great. My view is I think we should be slightly ahead of the consumer, not miles ahead of the consumer and not behind the consumer, but a little bit ahead. And I think we have a real role, given the expertise of our colleagues, given, you know, the advisor of both of our vets and our retail colleagues and our grooming colleagues, to really help educate consumers. They already come to us for advice. That's one of the big reasons that, you know, 40% of puppies and kittens in the UK will become a Pets Club member.
Did you just say 40%?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Amazing.
Because they're a lot of first-time pet owners, or they just want that advice. They can talk to them about nutrition, about grooming. You know, I obviously do shifts from time to time in the retail side. Like, people ask me all these questions. I haven't got a clue. And every time, like, everyone else is like, oh yeah, you need this or that. And I'm like, it's crazy the depth of knowledge we have. So actually, environmental is no different. Our colleagues care greatly about the environment. And so we're footprinting all of our food, or fingerprinting. I can't quite remember which one you do. One or the other.
Paw printing.
Paw print. That's it. Paw printing all our food to figure out we'll be talking to our colleagues about that over the coming months, so that they in turn can say to customers, you know, if you switch from this to this, then it halves your carbon emissions, for example.
And the currency of trust you must have is really striking out, particularly at this moment in social time.
Yeah, we did some research actually before we launched our All for Pets campaign, and we are 7 times more trusted than our nearest competitor. So it's an enormous bank of trust. I mean, we've both got older pets now, but I remember when we first had Freddie, I mean, we were in all the time asking, because we had no idea, right?
Is he supposed to have one of those?
Yeah, exactly. And then we had Barney, and we were still in all the time. We're like, really? What have we done wrong with this one?
But that could be a topic for an entirely different and longer podcast. But that idea of trust in a time when trust is at a premium, I think is fascinating and must be kind of part of what you and the board, and you've touched on the board relationship a couple of times, and we should just come on to that. But I mean, in a way, what you're custodians of is that trust.
Yeah, no, exactly. It takes decades to build, and it's very easy to destroy. So it's really important. And what part of what I want to do is bring that to life online as well. So when you turn up onto our online experience or our app experience, it should feel as advisory and warm as when you walk into our store and our colleague says hello to your dog and then to you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You mentioned, Lyssa, at the beginning, the kind of the transition to being a CEO and it being a different job, and that in a sense you don't have a boss, you've got a board. Tell us a bit about how you work with the board to discern strategy for Pets at Home and how that dialogue happens.
Yeah, no, I have a great board, actually. I'm very lucky. I was and I sat down before I joined with my chairman Ian, and Ian's coached a number of first-time CEOs into CEO positions, really experienced, and he actually had a 5-page document that talked about his role versus my role. And we worked through it, and I think that was just so helpful to kind of figure out and have those discussions up front before we got into the actual job.
And any advice you would offer somebody else about to step into that CEO role on the board relationship in particular? Clearly a very good relationship with the chair, clearly setting the terms of engagement, but anything else or any observations that surprised you despite having been an ed yourself before?
I think the right boards have a good mix of challenge and support, right? because that just like the right execs and the right businesses. So I think being open to challenge and not being defensive and not misinterpreting challenge as kind of, something else is quite important. So because in the end, Neds want to be helpful, right? They turn up 10 or 12 times a year. They want to be useful and they want to get engaged. So the more you and invite them in, the more you're going to get out of them. And I know that from being a Ned. It's very easy not to be defensive at the beginning because it's not really, the problems aren't really your problems. But 2 or 3 years in, they are actually critiquing things you've done and advising you to do things differently. And I think staying non-defensive and open is probably harder than starting that way.
Well, Lyssa, it's been an absolutely wonderful discussion, and we've now come to the part of our conversation that we like to call rapid fire questions, where we ask you a series of questions designed to help our listeners get to know you even better. All you have to do is answer as quickly as possible. First thing that pops to mind. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. What type of dog breed best describes your personality?
Cross between a Labrador and a Border Collie.
Okay.
I don't know what you call that. A collie. I don't know.
A labby? I don't know. I've read your mother is a chef.
She is.
And you love cooking.
Yes.
What is your favorite dish to cook?
Thai green curry.
Ooh, love that.
Yeah, definitely. Although I'm in a massive culinary competition with my husband. Up until 5 years ago, I was the chef in the family, and my friends knew me as quite an accomplished chef. Then he went and did a cooking course, and now he's much better than me. And the kids are like, "Oh, mummy, that was quite nice. It's almost daddy standard." And I'm like, so yeah, we can't really talk about cooking anymore.
What is your favorite way to exercise?
My favorite leisurey, exercisey thing is scuba diving. That moment when you get beneath the water and exhale and your daily sales reports are on the boat. You just, I love that. But I used to really, really like doing weightlifting and body pump and but now it's yoga. Yoga.
Yoga's a great one.
Yeah.
What's the best advice you've ever been given?
People won't remember what you said or what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. It's Maya Angelou. I love that quote.
I love that one.
It's very true.
Now that you're a few years into your CEO role at Pets at Home, what's one thing you wish you had learned sooner?
I think I knew intellectually, but it's not till you experience it, just how much impact every single thing you do say. If you look at someone funny, everyone is looking at you all the time. And the kind of the weight of the office is so weighty. It brings with it, there's certain things you can and can't do. And I think, I knew that intellectually, but experiencing that's quite different. You need to carry the weight of the office lightly, but seriously.
And what is one important skill every person should have?
Sleeping.
It's a great one.
Yeah, I'm very good at sleeping. And it's turned out to be my husband really isn't. So I can see the difference. But yeah, being good at sleeping, it's a superpower.
Can I ask one bonus question, Hoda, with your permission?
Yes, of course.
And Lyssa, with yours. How do I persuade my daughter that she doesn't really want a Syrian hamster from Pets at Home?
Oh, I think it's more about how does your daughter persuade you that you really need one in your life? Send us to me and I'll give her some top tips.
I had a horrible feeling you were going to say something like that. Lyssa, thank you for that incredibly engaging description of a very successful career, but one that also sounds like it's a lot of fun, and one where at Pets at Home you combine a real sense of purpose and commitment to the communities you serve as well as profit. The idea of balance seems to run as a vein through all of it, from the decision to do geography with that mix of the human and the scientific, to that point where, having survived an MBA and a first child, you decided that you wanted to do as well as to advise. The customer centricity of the time at Telewest and at Sky comes through, and then that need to take what was not a burning platform but a highly successful business at Pets at Home and help it become the broader platform to support people who care for pets. was really compelling. The advice that you gave new CEOs that it's not a quantum step as an executive, it's a completely different job with a completely different set of stakeholders and a sense that you're on and being observed all the time, I'm sure will resonate. As was that sense that you came back to a couple of times, that you need to be just a step ahead of your customers even while you listen to them. They can't necessarily tell you they want something they haven't seen yet. That comes through, and it comes through also that openness and that continuing communication in the description you have of the dialogue with your board, and the art of staying non-defensive, something I'm going to try and do when I talk to my daughter about the Syrian hamster.
Well, Lyssa, we have absolutely loved having you on Redefiners. Thank you once again for joining us.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a delight.